Hey, what's going on, guys? Just want to chop it up with you once again. So, in the midst of a course of lull of information coming through, um, ahead of free agency, ahead of the draft, I want to cover essentially who our core pieces should be, of course, on the offensive side as well as the defensive. So, it should be pretty straightforward. I don't think anybody will have any surprises necessarily from this list. But in addition to, of course, having the core pieces that we'll discuss. Um, I want to discuss how we could potentially emphasize those moving forward. And this will be specifically for potential players that'll come in through the draft rather than anybody that we might pick up during free agency. So, of course, this can change quite a bit if we hit on this during the free agency period. But let's go ahead and dive into it. So, of course, at the main top position, we have Zach Wilson. It's nobody else. That's the quarterback we just invested prime, real estate, if you want to call it that, draft capital into. And that's who we plan on building our future around in order to get us into the playoffs perennially, as well as achieve the Super Bowl heights, and of course, hopefully get another ring. Um, since we're climbing up there in decades. So, needless to say, Zach Wilson's going to be the guy. Um, I enjoyed all the impromptu comments about Mike White being the go-to guy after his stellar games, and things like that. But for all intents and purposes, Zach was going to always be the guy. You don't really see any cases in the draft or in like free agency unless it's just a clear cut dry decision, where somebody picks a high number one, especially in like the top three slots, and then you don't really see them continue to move forward with a plan around them. Uh, Carolina Panthers is the like most common one I can think right off the top of my head with and I can't even remember who the quarterback was before him anymore, but I want to say it was Cam Newton. They picked up right after grabbing somebody else in the first round the year before. But needless to say, so I think in terms of him being our core, obviously, the depth chart behind him doesn't necessarily matter so much, unless you want to put the like leadership and expertise. Veteran savvy is kind of like a qualifier behind why having a good backup matters. Outside of if he just has any kind of injury concern, but what we can do to support a quarterback in any fashion is always going to be the same thing. We need to either work on getting him a number one wide receiver, um, a dynamic tight end, and that can mean a number of things. You can have a guy that does it all, like a Gronkowski, um, like a what's the George Kittle, up in San Francisco, or maybe you can have somebody that specializes in something, a receiving threat, kind of like the I know I'm gonna butcher this. I think Dustin Waller's the kid's name, um, out in Oakland. But still, either way, I mean, it's really going to be a matter of what your offense is looking to do and what you want to provide around that, right? So between that number one wide receiver, dynamic tight end, always more offensive line talent is a huge one. I think people undersell how much the protection piece necessarily matters in terms of receiving talent that they might also have on the roster. So the Cincinnati Bengals kind of throw a little bit of a wrench in that whole argument since, the big thing coming out of last draft was that they opted for the synergy that Jamar Chase had with Burrows rather than, putting some prime real estate in front of him. So uh, everybody's philosophy is going to be different, and it is always going to come down to execution at the end of the day. But more talent up front never hurts. If maybe he was able to get Jamar Chase as well as have a good addition through free agency. Maybe they had a couple more seconds. Maybe they pull out something in the Super Bowl, along with a better record, etc. And then, of course, the thing that I think goes unspoken, and the Titans is really the only like headlining team that I can say really does this to a T, is essentially having a strong running game or a balanced running game. Um, Balanced, I would say I'm using a little bit less loosely. I think we see that through a multitude of other teams in the league. But a strong running game for sure, and that just doesn't mean like a power running game. I love the Browns running backs that they have. Nick Chubb's a complete monster. But then they also had Kareem Hunt to follow right up behind him, and then Deion Johnson at one point. So having those multitude of weapons, not in just in case of injury, but If you want to use a committee approach, even though you have maybe one or two running backs that on their own can be, the bell cow, is perfect. So personally for me, I think the best thing that we can offer in year two of his development would probably be a number one wide receiver or the offensive line protection. Um, I still think we're molding the offense, so we don't really have a designated we're passing much more than we're running. We're running much more than we're passing. It's necessarily just who's providing, the big plays, the key first downs, the chain movement on third downs, etc. But having that number one, and I use a number one strictly in terms of meaning like a boundary wide receiver. If they can go into the slide and do a couple of different other things, then that's perfect for us. But we haven't had somebody that can really just win on the outside in forever. More recent memory, Brandon Marshall, but I mean, outside of consistently hitting, it's we've struck out on that category on a number of receivers actually. So that would be my go-to. Personally, and this will lead into another discussion. I'm going to lead the number one wide receiver route again. Drake London's been my go-to for since I started thinking about draft stuff. Once the season went awry pretty quickly. But yeah, we'll dive into that into a little bit. So moving into the running back position, Michael Carter again. It's going to be the obvious go-to here. The kid was a monster, over 4 yards rushing yards per carry average. And then just overall, he kind of showed a little bit of everything. I think the blocking can definitely still use a little bit of brushing up on and development, of course. You can generally say that with any skill set for everybody. But between that and the receiving capability, I think those are big things as we continue to build up the talent on the offensive line. And then, of course, as everybody just gets more comfortable within the offense, I think we see potentially he can even take off further. So I'm definitely expecting to maybe see us flirt with that 1,000-yard rushing threshold, maybe somewhere in the 1,200s if things go really, really good for him and the rest of the offense. But I think the best thing that we can do for him is to pair him, again, with either a teammate that maybe has the same kind of skill set, of course, just so that when he comes out, especially if we're having a game where things are going really well, there's no breaks for the defense. They're going to come right in with a fresh pair of legs from a new guy, and it's just going to be them struggling all over again. Either that, or we can switch it to the complete opposite and find somebody that maybe is strictly kind of like the power punishing running back style, or maybe somebody who's just a monster receiving threat, like a Deion Johnson, like I want to say the Jason White from New England. But either way, I think that'll be the biggest thing that we can definitely do for Michael Carter, just to kind of balance out the touches. I think 15 to like 25 a game is probably the perfect, maybe, snap count for him. And then anything beyond that, we can kind of cycle through some of the other receivers. So it's one of the positions I think outside of tight end where maybe we see the most amount of change in terms of maybe who we still have there on the roster from this previous year. But my go-to for that is actually kind of up in the air. I didn't want to do or include anybody unrealistic, especially for a lot of the running backs that I think we start seeing fly off the boards in rounds 2 to 3. But somewhere between like round 3, round 5, I think is where we maybe start taking a look, and probably more realistically like round 4 again. But that's where we start taking a look at which running back do we want to try to pair up with him. So I had a few different names, and then I'll kind of break down the general skill sets, general reasonings why I think they might be there. But the biggest thing is just going to be availability at somewhere between that round 3 to 5 range. But we got Damian Pierce, Kyron Williams, Tyler, and I'm probably going to butcher it again, but Tyler Algier, Isaiah Spiller, Donovan Knight, Jerome Ford, Pierre Strong, Rashad White, and then Brian Robinson to kind of round things off. But the main thing a lot of these people are going to be, the main thing you'll find consistent across each of these running backs is going to be that they are essentially more power back related, or at least power back oriented, I should say. I kind of opted for that. There are actually a pretty significant amount of these players that have at least some level of decency in terms of catching. And not just out in the flats, but there is one person that particularly stood out. And I want to say it was, hold on, I did have notes somewhere here. Kyron Williams, that was the guy. Route running is strong enough to where he can even potentially line out wide as like a wide receiver at certain points. So I'm kind of split between having maybe like a third down specialist where we have that receiving capability. Maybe they can pick up some blocks and we can kind of develop the running, the patience, the looking for the lanes to be open, or really hitting the hole and taking off. So like a Kyron Williams really did a kind of appeal to me and jump out. I've been big on like the Brian Robinson guy for a while. He wasn't able to really like break out in Alabama. But he's definitely like the kind of old schoolish power running back. He has a little bit of wear and tear on him just due to the fact that he couldn't break out. So it's not like he was getting, 40 touches a game and, he's just, blowing out his legs at this point. But little wear and tear, we're kind of getting the old fashioned power back. He's never really had any fumbles or injury history as well, luckily, due to the touches and everything. So if we can get him in and kind of get him developed and stuff a little bit more quickly, I think that's kind of like the lightning thunder combo that we might be looking for. But there's a lot of other people. I think my top three or top four essentially, because I do like Tyler Algier as well. Tyler Algier, Brian Robinson, Jerome Ford, I've really liked. He's come on a little bit more recently as I checked out more scouting reports and then just kind of popped on some highlight tapes and things. Again, I'm no professional scout, obviously, but yeah, Brian Robinson, Jerome Ford, Tyler Algier, and then I would probably say like if it wasn't going to be Kyron Williams, um, probably like a Donovan Knight. From everything I've checked out, he just kind of has the overall athleticism to be able to kind of do a little bit of everything. But he's a little less nuanced in all aspects of the running back position. So he needs work across the board, hitting lanes, the patience to let blocks develop, um, when to just hit the hole and take off. Of course, route running, some receiving capabilities, and then just being able to pick up and pass block. I will say for a lot of these players, from most of what I've seen, it seems like this class struggles a little bit more when it comes to the blitz recognition and actually being able to do the blocking. I've seen on some reports and some of the highlight tapes where a lot of the players are at least willing to block. So I guess that's the plus for them. But just because you're willing doesn't mean you actually do anything. Brian Robinson, for example, you see him, try to get into the mix quite a bit. But for a guy, his build, he ends up kind of trying to do, what do you call it? Chop blocks, I think it is. But basically, kind of diving for the feet to take him out of the play rather than just standing him up or kind of like running him over. But either way, those are some of my names for the running back position. I think maybe we can grab up and kind of, build up and pair with Michael Carter. For the wide receiver position, again, pretty straightforward. I've heard a few people actually mention Corey Davis. My guy is going to be Elijah Moore. Uh, a lot of the old school scouts and stuff, I think they kind of stick to more of the, build, size, speed, power kind of aspect thing. I think the production is going to be the biggest thing that really matters. And Elijah Moore really has all the indications that not only can he be a number one wide receiver, but he could probably produce at, the top 10 tier level of wide receivers in the league, given, Zach Wilson continuing his development and everything. And we've heard numerous players during the offseason so far speak about kind of Zach Wilson's mindset, how he approaches the game and things like that. And, a lot of it sounds different. I heard the same thing from Sam Darnold. And I heard the same thing about, Geno Smith at one point and all these other quarterbacks that we pretty much brought in at one point. But I think between the front office saying it, the coaching staff, all of the players, because you didn't necessarily hear it from a player level with a lot of the previous quarterbacks. And if it did come up, because Sam Darnold, I believe, had a couple comments, it just kind of seemed like, the correct media kind of rehearsed speech to give so that there wasn't any backlash on anything. But Elijah Moore is my guy. I love people that can route run at all levels of the field, but he also has the ability to catch it and take off. So once we can actually get some screen games going, And just having that balance and synchrony between the passing and running offenses. Um, I think we'll do really, really, really well. He doesn't even necessarily need to be a focal point, so it's not like we need to manufacture touches. I know towards the end of the season we were doing things like incorporating him a little bit more in the running game and stuff like that. But he's not a gadget player by any means. He's definitely a legit NFL player that can play on the outside as well as the inside. So we got a lot of diversity with him. But a lot of his production, not only in college, but at various points during the season as well, came out of the slot. So not to say he's strictly going to be a slot receiver, but his perfect balance is probably going to be like 70-30, 70 in the slot, 70% in the slot, 30% on the outside, just to keep things mixed up a bit. But again, that boundary receiver, which is kind of what I was mentioning in the beginning of the video, it's really going to be the biggest thing for me. So Drake London is my guy. I think he kind of has the makings to be like an AJ Green kind of dynamic right away. Um, his ability to just kind of produce along the line, pressed up against the outside. He's going to get our press coverages really easy, but the thing that I love for his size is that his route running is really underrated. It's not that he's just kind of blowing by guys or out muscling them, because it's not like he's 6'5" and running a 4.2 by any means. But his hand usage and his ability to run his routes and create just a little bit of extra separation, which he doesn't really need for his frame, I think is what's kind of the difference maker for him. So I think that's a guy that we need for all of the talk about the West Coast kind of formula and the player archetypes that we need for it, where it's kind of shiftier slot guys like our Elijah Moore. I think this is a guy that kind of breaks outside of that scheme. So in every facet and capability, essentially what Denzel Mims was supposed to be for us, I think is what Drake London can do and provide to us right away, and then kind of the sky's the ceiling for the kid once he kind of gets an official offseason under his belt and everything like that, and kind of sees what else he can do within the offense and some things that we can open up. So, and then you never know if we don't actually trade Denzel Mims, having a guy like Drake London right away, with comparison build and stuff, at least from like the size perspective, that can be something that maybe works to his advantage. He picks his brain, whatever the case is. Everybody in the NFL should be humble in terms of what they can learn from various people, but that's neither here nor there. At the tight end position, I don't have anybody. There's not a single person I think we should build around. Tyler Croft was essentially a dud for us. No offense to any of the guys there. Ryan Griffin, he did have the pretty decent season with Adam Gase, but then it's back to him just kind of being like a disappearing act here. I don't really think the chemistry was there with any of the tight ends, but again, Zach Wilson looked pretty overwhelmed for a good half to like 3/4 of the season. So it wasn't really a great performance for a lot of people that were going to be on the roster at that point. But I think what we definitely need is going to be either an all-around kind of tight end, which I don't think we necessarily have in the draft. Everybody kind of has a little bit of their specialty, and then they can do something else to like a decent to maybe above average level. But I have two guys that really kind of I've been honing in on, at least in who we might pick up in the second round. There's some guys that I really like on the back end, like Charlie Kolar, which we can probably pick up, much later, fifth round, something like that. But again, that'll be for like another day maybe. But Isaiah Likely and Trey McBride are the two guys I really like. Trey McBride, just because he seems like somebody that he's the ball kind of gravitates to him. He finds his ways to get open and have his mismatches due to his size. He has the speed where he can break away from people and things like that. But then Isaiah Likely is really kind of the red zone threat that I think maybe we need for year one right away while he develops maybe other aspects of his game. I think he has something crazy like was either 13 or 16 touchdowns, something like that he's had in just like the last season or two. And then I think he had like 24 overall. The numbers could be out there, but I know he's had a lot of red zone touchdowns. And I think he produced the most. I could be mixing up tight ends, but I think he produced one of the most amount of catches within the red zone as well, even if they weren't touchdowns immediately. So I think having one of those two in, as well as whoever we pair up in free agency, which Dalton Schultz has been like the main go-to. But needless to say, we can have somebody like that already on the roster to take over for when that person, if it is Adults Schultz, um, most likely ends up moving on from us after, some point. Most of the free agency tight ends, I don't see necessarily getting a second contract unless they just blow the wheels off the offense when they, sign on with us. But finally, I think for our offensive line position, there's really only two players that can necessarily be, well, maybe three now, but really only two in terms of youth that we have. It has to be Mekhi Becton or Elijah Vera Tucker. Due to the availability issues, Elijah Vera Tucker is definitely going to be my go-to. So not only did he come in right away and produce, especially considering everything was expected to go with Mekhi Becton and him as the tandem, George Fant came in and did a beautiful job right away, which made his life, made AVT's life much easier still. And then Connor McGovern was able to, increase his, I don't want to say production, but improve his performance from what we've seen with his debut season with us. But either way, Elijah Vera Tucker's the guy. For me personally, and I've said it on a couple other videos too, my philosophy is a little bit different. I like to build from the inside out when it comes to the offensive line. So I think the best thing that we can do, knowing that the left tackle position should essentially be safe no matter who wins the competition between Mekhi Becton and George Fant. His right side is still something that we can get even better at. So while Connor McGovern did a much better job, he also can kind of play one of the guard positions maybe and still excel, or at least give us some adequate, performances there. So for me, I'm looking at the center position. And again, just as much as I've been, preaching for Drake London there, Tyler Lindenbaum's also been my go-to guy since I started checking out the offensive linemen. It doesn't matter what position. I won't say just as happy, but I would still be excited if we got in Ekem Ekwonu, or excuse me, I think it's Ikem Ekwonu, something like that. But either way, I'd be just excited still because he does have the position versatility, as well as basically the projections have been, of course, for long term, all pro guard or, above average to Pro Bowl caliber tackle, maybe all pro caliber tackle as well. So that's something a lot of fans should be excited for. But for the center position specifically, going from Kevin Mawai to Nick Mangold, I would love to see Tyler Lindenbaum be that next center that we have for, the entirety of his career. And that guy can come in right away and pretty much do damage. I think based on the size issues that they're saying, and keep in mind, this might be somebody that will still put on weight, get an NFL training program under him, and get that much stronger and, functional strength, things like that. He might end up settling somewhere in like the 310 range, which isn't crazy. So he might struggle with like an Aaron Donald, a Jared Grady or somebody like that. Right away, maybe. But I think the benefits of having him and what he can do right away and what he can still end up developing right away is going to very much outweigh maybe the specific player archetype, body fits, and some of the scheme stuff that he might see right away. So either way, those are my core guys for the offense. And then those are some of the projections I think in the draft that we can bring on, that'll help build that team chemistry and, of course, help boost the production of some of these core players right away moving into year two. Let me know what you guys think if you have a different core player, or if you think there's somebody more suited in the draft that I didn't mention, that can help boost some of these core players. But either way, as normal, I appreciate the support from all you guys, and I'll catch up with you again. Peace.